Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. So, in part 22 of our Explainer series, we completely mastered the sequencing of acute and chronic conditions, right? Well, today, for part 23, our mission is to tackle the ultimate efficiency tool in your codebook, section IB9, all about combination codes. We're going to see exactly how the codebook packs a massive, and I mean massive, clinical punch by combining an entire disease, its manifestation, or its complications into one single, neat, alphanumeric package. Let's dive in. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We'll start with the Supreme Coding Authority, break down the anatomy of a combination code, cover the cardinal mandate, explore the specificity exception, and lock in our final takeaways.
All right, Section 1, the Supreme Coding Authority. Before we even look at the codes themselves, we really have to establish exactly who makes the rules in the medical coding universe. Now, textbooks are absolutely fantastic tools for practice and learning the ropes, but the CMS official guidelines for coding and reporting, those are the supreme law of the land for HIPAA compliance. When it comes to the source material, it's explicitly clear that the CMS guidelines take absolute precedence over textbook interpretations. So today, our entire explainer relies strictly on the exact text from these CMS guidelines.
Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of Combination Codes. Now that we know whose rules we're following, let's look at what Section IB9 actually says. Straight from the CMS guidelines, a combination code is defined as a single code used to classify two diagnoses, or a diagnosis with an associated secondary process, which is just a fancy way of saying a manifestation, or a diagnosis with an associated complication. Basically, multiple clinical concepts are bundled up and packaged into one single alphanumeric box. Ultimate efficiency. So, these combination codes generally fall into three distinct buckets. Think of it like a giant clinical shortcut. We're talking about two distinct diagnoses occurring together, a diagnosis combined with its manifestation, or a diagnosis combined with its complication. They are specifically designed to make capturing the full scope of a patient's condition incredibly fast and accurate. Let's put this into perspective with a real-world example. Say a patient has type 2 diabetes and a cataract. Instead of coding those two things separately, the system literally swallows them both and unifies them into a single code, E11.36. The exact same thing happens with acute cholecystitis and cholelithiasis. So sudden gallbladder inflammation plus gallstones. Bam, they combine into K80.00. That is the magic of combination codes.
And that brings us to Section 3, the cardinal mandate.
Because these codes are so incredibly efficient, CMS strictly enforces how you must, and more importantly, must not use them. Here is the absolute golden rule directly from the guidelines. Multiple coding should not be used when the classification provides a combination code that clearly identifies all of the elements documented in the diagnosis. In plain English, if the book has a built-in combination code, using two separate codes to describe those elements is completely forbidden. You absolutely cannot chop a unified diagnosis into pieces. Trying to type out two separate codes for a combined condition? Yeah, that's a massive red flag. Double coding artificially inflates the code count on the claim, resulting in redundant reporting. This is a severe compliance error, and it will absolutely flag the claim for coding quality audits. Seriously, just don't double code when a combination code exists.
Okay, let's move to Section 4, the specificity exception. Now, medical coding is a highly regulated, almost legalistic system, right? And just like any legal system, there is a very specific, carefully designed loophole for when clinical presentations get highly complicated. What actually happens when a combination code exists, but it just doesn't tell us exactly how severe the complication is? While CMS has an answer for that. They state that when the combination code lacks the necessary specificity in describing the manifestation or complication, an additional code should be used as a secondary code. This is how we ensure we're capturing the complete, accurate clinical picture without breaking the rules. However, and this is a really big however, you can only utilize this exception if you follow an exact logic flow. First, you assign your primary combination code. Then, you check the tabular list. You can only legally snap that extra code into the secondary position if, and only if, an instructional note in the tabular list explicitly commands you to use additional code. If the book doesn't direct you to add it, you don't add it. Period. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Final Coding Takeaways.
It's time to lock in the absolute most important rules from today's explainer.
Number 1, CMS guidelines always rules supreme over textbook interpretations. Number 2, combination codes are your best friend. They merge diseases, manifestations, and complications into one incredibly efficient package. Number 3, our cardinal mandate. Never double code if a combination code exists unless you want to invite an audit. And finally, number 4, only add secondary codes if the tabular list explicitly demands it for extra specificity. Master these 4 pillars and your claims are going to be bulletproof.
That brings this explainer to a close. If you found this helpful, please remember to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with your coding colleagues so we can all stay compliant. But hey, mastering combination codes is just one piece of the puzzle. We know how to code active combinations now, but what happens when the dust settles? How exactly do we code the permanent scars and long-term aftermath left behind by an illness or injury that is already completely healed? Well, we'll tackle that fascinating question in Part 24 as we dive into Section IB10 to uncover the rules of sequela, also known as late effects. Until then, keep decoding.